Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of the Treff. Fortunately, we can today come together and listen to this presentation by Monica Kjellman-Chapin talking about her approach to vessel making. And yeah, I was really excited when I approached Monica when she suggested this project because I'd seen some of the vessels and was a bit curious how she made them. So yeah, Monica, thanks a lot for offering this Treff's presentation today. And without further ado, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Patrick. And thanks. I think these Treff talks are they've been really interesting. I'm sorry that I've been late for some of them, but I really thank you for organizing them and also for inviting me to talk about these vessels. Some of you know, but just ever so briefly, I started making these vessels or boxes in 2021. These are the two first ones. And I started making them because my mother died very suddenly very unexpectedly. And I realized when she died that I didn't know a lot about her, despite that I had known her all my life. I didn't know her very well. I didn't know a lot about her early life and her dreams and hopes and all this stuff. And I didn't know how to deal with my grief and my sorrow that she had died. But what I did know is that she collected boxes, and she also collected a lot of secrets. And so I started making these boxes to kind of process her death and a way to deal with that loss. And so these are the two first ones. They are both made from, and a lot of them are made from offcuts of square tube or rectangular tube. That the sort of thing that people reject, and there's just like a little piece of it sitting around. So these are the first two. I hot cut into these. So that's what this is. It's hot cut. In fact, since I'm sitting in the shop, I can even show you it's hot cut with this particular chisel, which is now taped together like some kind of Frankenstein's monster, but the handle broke and it's loose, but they were hot cut with this particular chisel. On the inside of one, I learned how to transfer print onto metal, and you do it with acetone. You can do it with a laser print, like a regular computer laser print. So I drew this flower, which is her birth flower, printed it out, and then transferred it with acetone. And if you don't do anything to it, put anything over it, then it will stay. But it's a sort of ghostly thing. The other one has this handle that goes through it all the way, because what I wanted was when you look at them, let's see if I have a little video here. When you look at them, I wanted you to think that there was something in them, and sort of that you wanted to open them and see what might be in them. So these are the first two that I made. That process of sort of hot cutting into it, I do that quite a bit on these. So this is a piece of rectangular tube that I hot cut from the bottom up with that same chisel, and also from the top, and then folded back in on itself. So forged it back in. And then right here, this is wrought iron, found wrought iron. And I really like using industrial profiles of metal, like angle iron, bulb steel, and I have some bulb steel sitting right here somewhere. Like this kind of thing, that I then forge out. So its feet are bulb steel, and then the top of it is actually, in this case, is angle iron. And part of it has to do with, as I'm processing the loss of my mother and thinking about her, they're very, in some ways, kind of finicky. They're small. This is a 3 millimeter bar that runs through all of these pieces, and then I made little nuts. So they have threads, and I threaded these little pieces on the top right here. So they're little nuts, and there's a little forward spacer piece. Because, and then there's our 3 millimeter rivets. As I realized, somebody mentioned it to me a couple months ago, that these seem as much an exploration of forging, which I haven't done I wasn't a blacksmith for a very long time. I haven't been a blacksmith for very long. I got my journeyman certificate in 2021, which is not that long ago. I haven't been forging for very long. And so it's in some ways, it's also an exploration of blacksmithing. It's an exploration of what is possible for me to do. So these are all called Reveal to Me, the series where they're somehow opened or they're cut open. So here's another view of this top piece that's riveted on. Anyway, I like riveting a lot. I think riveting is a really nice way to join things together, and I like the challenge of it. And I like texture, the difference between wrought iron and highly polished and things that are heavily forged, and I do a lot of hand sanding. This is another one of these Reveal to Me series, and often they have something in them. This will have, it doesn't yet, but it will have a photograph, a transferred photograph. So again, the sort of ghostly thing. In this case, I didn't hot cut. I cut this with an angle grinder, and then I filed it so that it's wider at the top and then it gets narrower. So I didn't like the way that it looked with just the angle grinder cut. So I spent a lot of time getting these little needle files in there, because it's not very wide, and filing it. And in this case, I again, a piece of found square tube, or rectangular tube in this case, that I left the rust on, because I really like the texture. So I spent a lot of time making sure that that stayed on there. The top of it here, this is a piece of wrought iron that I hot punched, and then this is one piece of mild steel. I forged a tenon on either end and then drove it through this hot punched hole, and then underneath here there's a rivet, a blind rivet, so that it won't rotate. And then I had to figure out how to attach this bar to the top of that vessel. And so it's riveted from here underneath, but then it's this is also threaded. So I drilled into this round bar and then threaded this. And a lot of it, there's a lot of, I work really slowly, and I spend a lot of time thinking about these things and how I want them to look, and drawing them out, and then trying to figure out how to do what I want to do. And because I didn't want to rivet on the top of this bar. And so how do I get them to sit exactly where I want them? And then here you see this bar, which is 4 millimeters, sits directly over the line of the cut. In the other picture, it doesn't look like that, but it does. It sits, so there's one more bar over here, but this bar had to sit directly over here. And often I'm the other thing is I'm terrible at math, and just terrible at it. Awful. And my father-in-law, who I think is watching, he remembers that at some point I said, I'm going to have to figure out what all the little lines on the ruler actually mean at some point, because I can't measure anything. I couldn't measure anything. Now I can, but I'm really terrible at math. But I'm obsessed with that there's a logical relationship between distances. And so in this case, the distance between these two is the same as the distance between this and this bar is the same as the distance between that and that other bar. So because I feel like you can see those things intuitively, even if you don't know that they're there, you'll see that something is not quite right if they're not perfect. So this is another one that I angle grindered. In fact, this one's sitting right next to me. So here it is. So you see how big it is. It's not enormous. And I found this piece of rectangular tube and it looked just like this. It was kind of beat up. It wasn't very tall. And I cut into both sides of it with the angle grinder. In this case, a wider angle grinder. So this slot is a lot wider. And then some of these pictures don't actually show this, but that slot is exactly where this foot ends. And the same thing is true on the other side. So they have to line up for me. It's very important that they line up exactly, which sometimes means that I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to get them to sit on there perfectly. And then I stamped its feet with keepsake and then keep me safe, which is a kind of play on words, because that's what you do with a keepsake box. You keep things safe. So it's the sort of thing that you would put dried flowers in, or you might put things that are important to you, things that you find. So far, what's in this box are wasps' nests, but they will also have pictures from my childhood in them. And then I can't get a good picture of it, but since I'm sitting here, you can see this was the top of it. The lid is heavily textured. Did this with fullering dies on the hammer. And then this flower, I made this flower and then cut into it with a fuller before forging it back on itself so that it kind of recesses. And then on the other side, there's another flower that hangs from the inside of it. This is another one of these hot cut pieces I just finished. I wanted to see what happened if you could punch a square, if you could punch a square hole in this square tube, and what would happen to it. Would it just cave in? So it was sort of an experiment, and then I really liked the way it looked, so I made them progressively less deep until down here it looks like they actually started up here, but by the time I got down here I wasn't hitting it very hard, so it wasn't going through, and it does kind of cave in, and then I didn't actually cut all the way through, so the tab is still attached on the inside. So it kind of looks like a ladder on the inside. And then here you might have noticed that the feet often is this bulb steel profile that this thing that I just showed you that I forge out quite a bit. This is its lid. This is right after I forged it and then polished it up, hand sanded it. It's a piece of wrought iron. And we found quite a bit of this wrought iron, and it starts off looking like this. It's really rusted. It's got a lot of texture to it already, and it always has holes in it. The piece that ended up in that vessel had a square hole that was off center. So when I forged it, it ended up off center. But I just wanted to show you what those pieces look like when I start, and then I always reforge them. I always reforge everything, actually. There's nothing that I get that I don't change in some way. But that also left me with the problem of how to put a handle in it, because normally what happens is I punch the hole for the handle, so I get to decide exactly how it's going to look. Or I build something like in those other vessels. But in this case, that hole was already there, so I had to figure out a way to fill it with something. And I tried a lot of different options, and some more complicated than others, like here with wedges. This is angle iron wedges. I thought if I could get these in here and wedge them and maybe rivet these down to the lid. Here's another option. This was also involved a lot of separate pieces wedged in there. And this was an early solution for its feet, by the way. I wanted to have them bent like this, but then decided I didn't like it. Now, you might notice magnets are my best friend, because some of these are kind of complicated and I want to see how they're going to look, and I need to be able to see them. So I just magnet everything to everything. So this is a magnet that's holding these in place. Magnets are holding these feet on at the moment, these legs on, just to see what it's going to look like. I ended up, here's another top view of that piece. Here's another piece that I tried. I ended up doing something like this, and then decided I really didn't like it. So I dug it out of there. I managed to dig it out of there without damaging the lid, and had to start again. And what I ended up doing was I found another piece of wrought that I put in there and then hit under the power hammer to upset it in that hole, so it's upset from both sides. And then I came through with a fuller to forge this texture on the one side, because I didn't want it just flat on the top. I wanted it to have some kind of appearance. I think it's important to have things that people want to touch. I want people to interact with the vessel. I don't want people to just look at these things. I want them to reach for them and see, like, why is there a hole in it? What's inside of it? I want the surfaces to be interesting in some way. And then you see here, its feet, I ended up straightening out its legs and making these spacers. This is forged tube that I forged, its tube that I forged down. I swaged it down so that it got thicker, but still accommodated this rivet. And this is a 3mm rivet. It's a pre-headed rivet on one side. And then, so I riveted it while Benjamin, my partner, held it very carefully over the horn of the anvil, because it's not very big. The riveting is always a challenge. There are a lot of kind of subsets. They're all vessels to my mother. But some of you who have lost people or grieve for other reasons, you have lost something in your life that you feel sorrow about, and that you think about, or that troubles you, or that affects you emotionally. You know that those emotions change over time, and sometimes they change really, really quickly. And so the series, there are sub-series within the series Vessels to My Mother. And I had the opportunity to be at Steneby for 5 weeks in February, for the end of January to the beginning of March, to be a visiting artist there, and to just make these vessels and interact with their amazing students, which was amazing. It was an amazing experience. And next to the saw, in the trash bin, in the metal scrap bin, I saw this little piece exactly like this. And this is the welding pattern from the industrial welding. And normally you would get rid of that, but I thought it was so appealing. It just caught my eyes. I was standing there waiting for something else to cut, so I plucked it out, and then I lived with it for a little while. And around the same time, when I was there, one of the students came, and he we had been talking about how I collect little bits and I want to incorporate them into the vessels. So he gave me all of these offcuts of Damascus that he had made. He just had this sort of bin of Damascus stuff. And immediately, all of them, there were so many, I could have taken many more, but I didn't want to be greedy. So I took these. And immediately this one right here caught my eye. And so that became the lid for this little vessel. So I forged a foot for it. I forged its lid. And all of it relates, of course, to this stripe that came originally from this process that I didn't, this was just a chance pattern. I just loved it. And so I tried to continue that in forging the lid, hitting it very, very gently with fullering dies. And then I drilled very carefully into this piece of Damascus and put a pin inside of it, and then riveted it to the lid. And then it's filled with river sand because my mother was from Oslo. And there's a saying in English, some rivers run deep, that a person who's quiet doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a lot to say. There can be a lot going on. So this piece is very, very small. It's like 50 millimeters tall, but it says a lot. It has a kind of monumentality to it. While I was at Steneby, the students found out that I really like to collect odd bits of stuff. And so one of the students, Matthias Kuhn, he was kind enough to give me this entire tray of bits from the ironworker, which was a treasure for me. This is an absolute treasure. One of the reasons it's a treasure is because I just love them, these slugs, and they're easily drilled through because they already have center punch marks. So those of you who tried to drill round things, which I often do, round, very small round things, very difficult. So they made their way into a series that's not for my mother, but related. When I was at Steneby, before I left, I wanted to make something for the people who had made my stay there so well possible at all, and so wonderful. So there were 6 people that I interacted with on the faculty fairly regularly, and so I decided to make them a little vessel, since that's why I was there in the first place. I made them all a little vessel, and so here they are. This is what I call the Steneby Six, and because they weren't about grief in this case, they gave me a chance to explore something that I wanted to explore, and that was color. So these have applied color. They are very small. You'll see a picture here in a minute how small they are. Each one of them is related to the person for whom it was given. They may not see that, but to me, they could only, each one belonged only to the person that I had intended it for. It wasn't sort of a mix and match thing. So the colors were chosen specifically. The appearance was chosen specifically. And you see here some of these things that I was gifted. Here, a little bit of the process. I worked on all 6 simultaneously. It was very important that I made all 6 at the same time. Every vessel that I make, I tension fit the bottoms in. And then I pop them back out and I bevel them and then I weld them. So here they're tension fit. Here I've welded them and then I sandblasted them. Here I'm working on their lids, and I have no problem reforging something if it doesn't work quite right. If it doesn't look quite right, I will just remake it, because to me, there's a difference between, say, this texture and that texture. There's a difference between that texture and that texture. It has to be right. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. And so I'll just remake it. And then I started applying color. And some of you may know, but as kids in the US, there's something, it's called a crayon. It's a wax coloring stick, basically. It's non-toxic. It comes in a box of 64 colors. And you can, it's just, because it's just colored wax, you can apply it to a metal surface, apply it. If you heat up the surface to varying degrees, you get a different effect depending on how hot it is. So here I am starting to apply it. This is after I sandblasted some of the rust away, but not every place, because I didn't want them to be solid colored. So here you see I've sandblasted the surface, and then here I've applied color. This is rust. Here I've applied color. This is rust, and then this is applied color. And you see the difference in the surfaces of the lids. That's very important to me. Here's another one where you see clearly how that color might run and how it cracks, how it interacts with the surface. It's a little bit hard to control, and I really like that because it's sort of unexpected. You can of course blast it right off again and try again, but I really like how unpredictable it is. And then the parts that don't have that on there, I put Renaissance wax on to preserve either the sandblasted surface or the rust. And here, these by the way are hand forged, these lids. I hand forged this with a very, very thin peen hammer, a little French peen hammer. And here, so here's this one. This, you see how small they are. They're really sort of tiny little objects, and they're precious. And then, like all of the vessels, there's something inside of them. So I wrote notes to each person that were inside of these vessels. And if they never discovered the notes, well, that has nothing to do with me. Like if they don't want to open them, then okay. But working on that Steneby Six made me also think about working small when I got back to making vessels for my mother. So when I got home, I started these two vessels. They're not done yet, but here I decided that I wanted to hot cut. And so I hot cut from the bottom up, and then I hot cut their lids. These are little stainless steel bits. I collect everything. I try not to hoard, but these were from a shower curtain. There's just these perfect little round stainless steel washers. So I made those into the feet. And then let me just talk really quickly about this. This is some industrial profile pipe that we got, and I didn't think was very interesting, and I didn't want to make vessels out of it because I'm really attracted to square and rectangular. And we had it, and we had it, and we had it, and then I decided, you know what, maybe I'm going to crush it and see what happens. So here I am. This is going to work. Sorry about the noise. That press is loud. So our press is really unpredictable, as you can see. I mean, you can run it, but you can't, it's not like one of those fancy new presses where it has the return and you can like close a matchbook. I mean, you can run it and try and not crush something, but it sometimes it just has a mind of its own. And I wanted the whole vessel to be heated so that I couldn't control where exactly that crush was going to happen. And then here they are, and then here are their bottoms. Again, I pressure or tension fit those lids, the bottoms in, and then welded them, getting to be a better welder. And then this is what they turned into. There's 3 of them. They're very small. They all have slightly different lids, and then these are core drilled from angle iron. We had another project and we needed to core drill some angle iron, and they ended up these funny little shapes. And to me, they look like little bird mouths, you know, in the nest, the way that they're kind of screaming. So I put them on these vessels, and then these are filled with coal dust. And it relates to my mother and her two sisters. I'm gonna hop right over this sort of big thing. I'll just flash by these. This is the biggest thing I've ever made. Just so you see, it's whoops, there's Terry Clark looking at it, so you get some idea of scale. It is filled with 73 bits of paper, but here's one of these things where this is a piece of wrought that I decided had to be put in there and then set as a tenon. And I made all of these figures. There's 20 of them out of 20 millimeter. Here we're building it. Oops, where's my picture? Even though their proportions are always the same. Here I am doing math, by the way. And the proportions are always the same. The tools are always the same. The process is always the same. I always go in the same, exactly, start on with the right eye, then the left eye, then down the right side of the nose, down the left side of the nose, then the bottom of the nose, then into the chin. They still don't look the same. And so I had to decide which one went with what, which 5 were going to stand together. So that's what's going on in some of these where I'm deciding. And then this is the vessel, and then it's filled with these pieces of paper because my mother died when she was 72. So there's 72 words that relate to her, and then one secret. So it's 72 in one. And I decided to make a small version of them. So these guys are made out of 12 millimeter rather than 20, but the proportions are the same. And you see here's one that's a reject. I rejected him. And then they're waiting to be finished. So they're standing around right over here, as a matter of fact. So here they are standing again, waiting. And this is their vessel. So here you see very clearly this has been sandblasted, and then I applied the color to it. You see how varied it becomes when you do that. You can really layer the color on, and it's really quite interesting. So, thinking about color, I'm nearing the end here, believe it or not. Thinking about color, these are also these industrial profiles that I wasn't that crazy about, but I heated them up and I put them under the press, and they turned into these kind of swollen little vessels. And then when I cleaned them up, I realized they have a little industrial marking. So they became 2AG, and they look like lemons. And there's a saying, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So it's 2AG when life gives you. And I want to paint the insides of them, in this case, this bright yellow color. And this was the test. So this is acrylic spray paint. I'll do a nicer job than what you see here, but the idea was that when you open it, there'll be something unexpected in it. Troll, okay. The point I wanted to make is that my approach to this is really slow, and it's kind of I think about them a lot, and I think about what their meaning is, and I think about how the vessels should go together and what they could possibly signify. So at any time, my workspace looks like this, and this is my workspace here. This is where I'm sitting right now, and this is basically what it looks like. Here are those 2 little lemon pieces. There's some couple other pieces in process. There's some bulb steel. There's troll. There's some other unfinished. There's my sketchbook. There are those guardian pieces, and then here are some of the other works that have been finished that are just sort of sitting around. Because I think that you have to live with these pieces because they're meaningful, because they're not just like, and I don't want to say just, but because we make a lot of railings and fire sets, and that it's not that we don't put care into those things, but that we put a different kind of care, I guess, into those than these things. And so I like to have them in my workspace. So I'm sitting in that space that you just saw, and then right here is my forge. So that when I'm forging, right behind me is one of my anvils. And then over there is another one of my anvils. So when I'm in this space, no matter what I'm working on, I can just look over here as I'm heating a piece, and I will see these, and maybe something will occur to me that I need to write down on my chalkboard, or I need to put that lid with that thing, or all of a sudden one of these will just resolve itself magically in my mind because I'll see something differently that day, because I might feel differently about my mother that day, or her death that day, or whatever it is. And so something that doesn't sit quite right, all of a sudden it just kind of loosens, and it's like, oh, that's what needs to happen. Like those lemon pieces, they had a different lid, and then now I realize what their lids need to be, and so that's what's going to happen to them, and then they need to be yellow on the inside. Anyway, that was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be.
Thank you, Monica, for this fantastic presentation. Yeah, very, very touching, and at least I found it very touching and very, very personal. So thank you for sharing these insights. Paul Voss, beautifully designed and crafted. Top. John Dittmeyer, inspiring. Monica. Benjamin Kjellman-Chapin's iPad. I may be a bit biased, but amazing work and great presentation.
Yeah, he's biased. He has to say that.
John Dittmeyer, what is your vocation, livelihood now in Norway, Monica?
I am now, I work full-time as a blacksmith. My partner and I run a shop, and I was an art historian. I was an academic for most of my adult life. I have a PhD in art history, and I was a professor of art history. But I am from Norway originally, but I grew up in the United States. And when we moved here, I became a blacksmith. And in part, we moved here because my mother died, and my father died, and I got cancer, and we just decided we needed a bit of a change in our lives. So we moved to Norway, in some ways before it was too late. So we moved in, I moved in 2014. I moved back to Norway. And so now this is the shop behind me.
It's a great use of the crayons, Monica.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, yes. Are you using a torch to distribute the crayons?
Yeah. I use a torch. I run the torch over the metal, and then I draw directly on the metal with the crayon.
Very good.
You can also, I guess, put it on and then direct the heat to make it run. I have to admit, I haven't done it so much, and I find sometimes, depending on the surface, I don't quite get the effect that I want, but sometimes it turns out really well. Like this, I think this little piece came out really well. This is 2 colors.
Yes.
So I was quite pleased with this. And then it doesn't seem to, I mean, you can scratch it off, obviously, but I've touched this and carried it around, and it doesn't seem to go away. It's not so volatile. It's not, so I quite like it. I was fascinated by that other, and I can't, unfortunately, because I'm really bad with names, the blacksmith who does color with the torch and gets the like the tempering colors on the sheet metal, and gets some amazing colors. Patrick, you probably remember her name.
Yeah, this was Anna Bobisuti.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, those colors were amazing. I can get some nice tempering colors, but I've not gotten them on vessels. So I really want to explore that too, to see what I can do with that.
I know that the tempering colors on titanium are permanent.
That would be really nice.
Do you have time for scholarly research now, or any academic pursuits?
I you know, when we moved here, I wrote I participated in a couple of publications for Phaedon Press, and I haven't given it up entirely, and I'd like to write more about craft-based practice than I did when I was an art historian. So I would really like to get more. I don't want to become an academic again, but I see no reason not to continue both. So
Lars Peter Skål. Well, my pronunciation is what it is. Lars Peter Skålen. They were really pretty and quite unique. And hi, I'm a former Herlight student.
yeah, Herlight is the one of the 2 blacksmithing schools here in Norway, and Benjamin used to teach there. So, and is sometimes a guest teacher.
Yeah. Well, while others are thinking about questions, I have one. I've also experimented with this wax coloring because there was in 2020 an article in Abana's.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was in the Anvil's Ring, and this guy was making amazing flowers at that point, and
Yes.
I found it fantastic, and I have used it so far only on forged and brushed steel, and I didn't get at all the intensity of the colors that you had. Do you have, since you seem to have experience with different base treatments like ground and forged and brushed and so on, what is your like experience? What gives the best or the brightest, fullest coloring?
So far, I've had the best luck with sandblasting. Because that was also how I discovered it, was that same article in the Anvil's Ring, and he was getting these gorgeous colors on the flowers, and I was like, this is fascinating. So we ordered some crayons, and I sometimes it works really well, and then sometimes it doesn't work. And I've also found that some of the colors work better than others, but sandblasting seems to give enough of a kind of tooth to the surface where the color wants to stick pretty well. And I do a lot of, if I clean the surface with an axial, with a wire wheel on an angle grinder, and then polish it so that it's some of those pieces that you saw, they're really, really shiny, and the steel is really sort of silvery. That's because I'm polishing them with like a Scotch-Brite wheel on an angle grinder and trying to get that surface. And the color does not want to stick to that at all. It just kind of, it slides right off of it. But I also found that you can get a very subtle effect using colored pencils. If you heat up the colored pencils, I mean, heat up the surface and then color with colored pencils, because they also have a tiny bit of wax in them. So you can get some really subtle color, but I've gotten some nice bright in the red family, like magentas and fuchsias and pinks. And those are probably the most vivid colors I've gotten. But always on a surface that has some texture to it.
Okay, thank you.
And then they have to be Crayola. I don't know what you've used, but they have to me, they have to be Crayola crayons.
Okay.
These are the best ones.
Okay.
So fantastic. You get really great colors. You see, I've used a lot of them already.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I really want to try. We have some enameling powders, which I've experimented with, like for glass enameling, which you spread on the surface and then you heat and it melts, and you can get quite a nice color from that. But there's a ground that you should put on it first, and then you can put it in the oven. And I didn't have the ground, so mine has been really somewhat iffy. But we have a lot of colors, and I really want to try that a little bit more, because I think you can get some really nice colors using that. And one of the Steneby students did this, and I haven't tried this yet, but she was doing this where she would spray paint her work, and then she would heat the spray paint on the metal, and it would turn into this other color, and then she could layer color on top of that, which was really gave a really interesting effect. So I think it's kind of for me very underexplored what I can do with color. I never thought about color really before this. I read that article and then thought, oh, you know, I want to respond to those the Steneby Six with color that I associate with them, and this may be the perfect opportunity to explore that. So
Cool. Yeah, no, thanks for this in-depth answer. Paul, once again, a compliment for the beautiful art line. The objects radiate meaning.
Thank you.
Are there further questions from anyone? As said, you can also post them to the chat. John Dittmeyer, another coloring technique is a mix of white shellac, denatured alcohol, and ceramic powders such as iron oxide.
Great.
So,
I'll try that.
yeah, so one can, well, think of ceramics, pottery studios that will have copper oxides, iron oxides, other colors. So it's really, one is painting, and the white shellac is the binder.
Right.
And this dust, this powder, remains on the steel surface, especially in the crevices.
Right.
Mhm.
Great.
Another question: are the blacksmiths of Norway interacting among themselves and with neighboring countries?
Well, it depends on it depends on who you are, I suppose. But we have an annual meeting here. So we live in Näsvik, and our shop is at Näsvik, and our closest neighbor is an ironworks museum. And every year there's a meetup here at the end of June.
Great.
And Patrick will be coming to it. Everyone's invited to it. It's very low key and very friendly, and a very nice meetup. So a lot of the blacksmiths, I mean, we're a very long country, let me put it that way. So we don't have a lot of people, but we're very long. So it's hard to get from one place to another. Sometimes, so some of the people who live in the northern, we're in the very southern part of the country. So somebody who lives up north, it's a little hard for them to come here maybe, but for a weekend. But a lot of people come here for that Treff. And then some of us, like my partner and I, are members of the Swedish Blacksmithing Association, and we go to some of their events when it's possible, because it's not impossible for us to get to Sweden from where we are. Again, if you live in Tromsø or Alta or Lofoten or somewhere, you know, going pretty much anywhere is a plane ride at least. But for us, like Dole's Longed, where Steneby is a 4-hour drive. So we have quite a bit of contact with them, and we try to, Benjamin and I, because he's American, I grew up in the US, we tend to be maybe more international than a lot of people. We know Louis, of course, and Maria, and have met people from other countries, and we try and engage in international events, because we don't like to be so navel gazing as to just, you know, it's like us down here, you know. And we have a friend who's in Kristiansand. There's not a lot of blacksmiths in the area, so we try.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much for your very interesting lecture.
Thanks.
And I'm sure we'll meet sometime.
I hope so.
Well, I would have another question, which is there like do you have like a final idea of this series? Do you have like a planned end, or how is that going to be?
You know, had you asked me that when I started it in 2021, I would have said, of course, I'll make them, and then my grief will be over. What I've realized is that grief doesn't operate quite that way. That when you lose someone and when you're grieving them, you can go maybe, weeks, like you'll think about them and you're not grieving, you're thinking about like happy memories or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden something will happen and you're like, oh yeah, no, that was a big loss. Or you'll realize like, oh, like I can't call that person or whatever it is. And so I don't know that they're always about grief. They started that way. I mean, sometimes now they're sort of about like, I wonder how my mother would have thought about this, or I wonder what she was like as a child, or some memory will show up for me, and I'll make a vessel related to that. So, which I still think is part of the grieving process because she's not around anymore, but I don't see them stopping. I wouldn't say I enjoy making them. I mean, sometimes like I enjoy the process of forging parts of them or whatever, but the making of them isn't like, oh, this is fun. That's not what it's about for me. It's a way of showing my respects. Like other people go to a grave site maybe and like put flowers down or what have you. For me, this is a way of sort of communicating and processing those thoughts and paying my respects and all. And so they're not always about specifically like, I'm really unhappy that my mother died suddenly, right? I wish I'd had her for longer. It's not always about that, but it's sort of like, gosh, I wonder what she and her sisters were like and what happened to them. And I know their childhood was really pretty tough, which is why I made those 3 little vessels. I had just enough of that tube to make 3 of them. And so there's 3 of them and they're all sort of crushed and they all have different textures, but they're all 3 the same with the same sort of mouth piece at the top, that lid piece. And they're all going to be filled with coal dust because there was something kind of dark that happened. But I also think coal dust is beautiful because when you look at it, it sort of glints and it's shiny. And so no, I mean, the long answer is what I just gave you. The short answer is no, I don't see them stopping. So.
Well, thank you. I was expecting rather a long answer because I
Yeah,
think
well,
it's a difficult question.
Patrick, I told the students at Steneby that they could ask me when I was there. You're not obligated to talk to them in some ways, but I said they could ask me anything. I said, just make sure that when you ask me something, that you have enough time for me to give the answer. So, yeah.
No. Anyway, yeah, well, thank you. This has been a fantastic presentation. Looks like there are no further questions. Other announcements. If you are yourself feeling like, hey, I have this cool thing I always wanted to share with people, you can approach me or Mariano or Paul Voss and just say, hey, I have this idea talking about the Treff, I want to talk about in the Treff, and most likely we can make it happen at some point in the future. Or if you ever wanted to dig deeper into a topic, the best way to dig deep into something is to teach it to someone else.